The screen of my phone illuminated the dark corner of my bedroom at 3 in the afternoon, a time when the rest of the world seemed to be moving with purpose, while I remained anchored by a familiar, sinking lethargy. It was a message from my cousin, Sebastian. The text was brief, almost clinical. "Hey Leo, just checking if you're coming tonight. Mom said you were feeling under the weather, but it's Grandpa's 75th, so it would be weird if you weren't there." I stared at the words until they blurred. My mother hadn't told me about the party. In fact, she had told me the celebration was being moved to next month because of a scheduling conflict. This was the first pebble in what would soon become an avalanche of realization. It wasn't just a missed invitation. It was a deliberate omission, a silent agreement among the people who shared my blood that my presence was, at best, optional and at worst a blemish on their curated family portrait. Growing up in the shadow of the Eldridge family name meant living within a hierarchy that was established long before I could even speak. At the top was Sebastian, the golden boy, the intellectual titan who seemed to solve differential equations in his sleep. Then there were my parents, Harold and Elena, who viewed life as a series of competitive metrics. And then there was me. I was labeled the slow one, or the simple cousin, by the time I was 7. It started with playful jibes about my daydreaming and evolved into a rigid family dogma. Because I struggled with rote memorization and preferred the quiet company of my sketchbooks to the boisterous debates at the dinner table, I was categorized as intellectually inferior. They spoke over me as if I were a piece of furniture, discussing my limited potential with a mix of pity and exasperation. I wasn't just a person to them, I was a project that had failed to yield a return on investment. As the years progressed, the subtle signs of exclusion grew into a deafening roar of silence. I noticed the way the family group chats would suddenly go quiet when I asked a question, only for me to find out later that a secondary, main chat existed without me. I saw the photos on social media of hiking trips and brunch outings I was never told about. The anxiety began to manifest as a physical weight in my chest, a tightening of the throat whenever I had to enter my parents' house. I found myself overcompensating, laughing too loudly at jokes I didn't find funny, and reciting facts I had memorized just to prove I had a functioning brain. But the more I tried to fit into their mold, the more I felt myself fracturing. I was a ghost in my own life, haunting the hallways of a family that had already moved on from the idea of me. Despite the ache in my gut, I decided to show up to the party. I didn't call my mother to confront her. I simply dressed in my best suit and drove to Aunt Beatrice's sprawling estate. The driveway was lined with luxury cars, a glittering testament to the Eldridge success. When I walked through the front doors, the air in the foyer seemed to thin. I saw my mother across the room, her glass of champagne frozen halfway to her lips as her eyes met mine. There was no warmth there, only a flash of annoyance followed by a practiced plastic smile. I moved through the crowd, feeling the familiar sting of being looked through rather than looked at. I was a guest at a table I was supposed to own, a stranger in a room full of people who knew my middle name, but nothing of my soul. Seeking a moment of reprieve from the suffocating polite conversation, I slipped into the butler's pantry to find a glass of water. The swinging door was cracked just enough for me to hear voices from the kitchen. It was Aunt Beatrice and my mother. "I told you he shouldn't have come, Elena." Beatrice's voice was sharp, cutting through the ambient noise of the party. "He just brings the energy down. He stands there with that blank look on his face, and honestly, it's embarrassing when our friends ask what he's doing with his life. He doesn't have the drive Sebastian has. He's just stagnant." My mother sighed, a sound of profound disappointment that echoed in my bones. "I tried to keep him away, Beatrice. I lied about the date. But he's always been stubborn in the most inconvenient ways. It's exhausting trying to compensate for his lack of substance." I didn't stay to hear the rest. I backed out of the pantry, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The betrayal wasn't just in the words, it was in the casualness of their delivery. My existence was an inconvenience to them, a social liability. I thought about the promotion I had earned the week before, a lead designer role at a prestigious firm, and how I hadn't even mentioned it because I knew they would find a way to minimize it. To them, my achievements were mere accidents, fluke occurrences in an otherwise mediocre life. I realized then that no amount of success, no degree of brilliance would ever change the narrative they had written for me. I was the dumb cousin, and they needed me to stay in that box so they could feel superior in theirs. When I finally confronted my parents that evening, the masks didn't just slip, they shattered. I stood in their living room, the echoes of the party still ringing in my ears, and asked them why they felt the need to lie. My father, Harold, didn't even look up from his tablet. "Don't be dramatic, Leo. We just wanted a night where we didn't have to worry about you feeling out of place." My mother added, "We protect you from yourself, honey. You don't handle the pressure of these events well." Their gaslighting was seamless, a well-oiled machine designed to keep me small. They weren't apologizing for their exclusion. They were justifying it as an act of charity. I left their house that night, knowing that the bridge wasn't just burned. It had been dismantled plank by plank. A few days later, I returned to my childhood home while they were away, looking for a box of old sketches I had left in the attic. Amidst the dust and the relics of a suppressed childhood, I found a leather-bound folder tucked inside a crate of my father's old business records. Inside were my school reports, but not the ones I remembered. There were letters from teachers praising my unconventional brilliance and extraordinary spatial intelligence. There was an evaluation from a specialist I vaguely recalled seeing when I was 10, stating that I wasn't slow, but rather gifted in ways that traditional schooling didn't measure. My parents had hidden these. They had buried the proof of my worth to maintain the hierarchy that placed Sebastian at the center and me at the periphery. Reclaiming those documents felt like finding the keys to a prison I had lived in for 24 years. With this new clarity, I began the grueling process of building an independent life. I stopped answering the guilt-tripping texts and the hollow invitations to holiday dinners. I moved to a small apartment in the city, far from the suffocating expectations of the Eldridge Circle. I poured my energy into my work, finding a community of artists and thinkers who valued my perspective not because it mirrored theirs, but because it didn't. I learned that self-worth isn't something granted by a council of elders. It is something forged in the quiet moments of self-acceptance. The anxiety that had once been my constant companion began to dissipate, replaced by a steady, quiet confidence. I wasn't the dumb cousin. I was a man who had survived a war of attrition against his own identity. 2 years passed before I saw them again. It was at a neutral location, a small gallery opening where some of my work was being featured. They arrived unannounced, looking out of place amidst the vibrant, modern energy of the space. When my father tried to offer a backhanded compliment about the interesting use of color, I didn't feel the old urge to scream or defend myself. I simply looked at him, seeing a man blinded by his own narrow definitions of success. "I'm glad you could see it, Harold," I said, using his first name for the first time. "But your opinion on my work is no longer a requirement for its value." There was no heat in my voice, only a devastatingly calm finality. I walked away, leaving them standing among the art they could never truly understand. Finding closure didn't mean receiving an apology that would never come. It meant realizing that I was the author of my own story. The labels they had pinned on me, inferior, slow, stagnant, were nothing more than reflections of their own insecurities. Resilience isn't just about bouncing back. It's about moving forward into a shape that no one else designed for you. As I stood on the balcony of my apartment that night, looking out at the city lights, I felt a profound sense of peace. I had lost a family of blood, but I had found a family of choice, and more importantly, I had found myself. The journey from the dumb cousin to a man of independent worth was long and riddled with shadows, but the light at the end wasn't a destination. It was the fire I had carried within me all along.